welcome. We are back with the Embodied Love Lounge. Aaron Michael here.
Dr. Saida.
And we're going to be talking about a topic that not many people speak about, interestingly enough. And that is the acronym CUMD, otherwise known as...
CUMD. It's the CUMD debate.
It is the CUMD debate, and it does sound a little bit exactly like what you might think it is, which is the ability to predict if someone, specifically people with the female body, if and how easily they can come.
Yes, based on
the measurements of the distance between their clitoris and the urethral medius.
Okay, what is the urethral medius?
Well, doesn't everyone know what the urethral medius is?
No, they don't.
Well, first of all, most people probably don't even know what the urethra is, but that is the pee tube by which anybody pees out of. Mm-hmm. Now, the urethral medius, if you were to look, for instance, at the vulva or the vagina, and to see kind of like where the pee hole is located, which would be just above the entrance to the vagina and beneath the clitoris, you'll see that there is a small hole, and that's from where the pee comes. And then if you were to go kind of just around that pee hole,
like a 10-cent diameter.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be maybe. I think a dime would be a large, if you're using U.S. coins, a dime would be a large urethral meatus. But anywhere to like a quarter to a half of a centimeter in like diameter, that's kind of what you'd probably expect to find for the urethral meatus. But it's this circular area that's a little bit raised when getting engorged, when getting turned on. It also kind of has some added sensitivity to it.
Right.
And what it is, it's actually showing that external part of, or kind of where the bump comes from, the urethral sponge, which surrounds the urethra and then swells. So that's what you get with the urethral meatus there.
Okay. So tell us a little bit more. We have the clitoris. Mm-hmm. We have the urethral meatus. What's the D in the CUMD?
So that is the distance. So
okay.
They call it the Clitoral-Urethral Medius Distance.
Okay.
Or the distance between the clitoris and the urethral meatus. There has been some debate where it's to be measured, if it's to be like from directly at underneath where the gland meets the flesh of the body in terms of like towards the urethral side, mm-hmm. or is it where the clitoris meets the body and then goes beneath and behind the pubic bone. Okay. So are you measuring it basically kind of at which end of the shaft of
and
the
why
clitoris?
Do we care about this measurement?
Why do we care about this measurement? Well, supposedly, some people believe that the smaller this distance is, in fact, I think it's if the distance is of a certain shortness, then the likelihood of being able to have an orgasm from penetration alone is heightened.
Okay, so someone somewhere at some point decided that the female anatomy had a very specific, it needed to be a very specific distance in order to maximize penetrative orgasm.
Yes, so they were basically looking at a bunch of women and they go, oh, look, these women have an easier time having orgasm. Well, their CUMD is shorter than those that have a longer CUMD and therefore take longer to CUMD.
To come. So, when did this start?
This is not a recent debate,
okay.
Actually. So this started, I mean, we're talking like back in the 1920s or so.
Okay.
And it's...
So like 100 years ago.
Yeah. So this is, and it's actually involving some like kind of big names out there. Sigmund Freud comes into the story.
Well, he thinks the clitoris is, an immature sexual organ. So
precisely, and one of his like big students, a French psychoanalyst, mm-hmm. who also happens to be like the great grandniece of Napoleon Bonaparte.
That's an interesting fact.
Yeah. Her name is Marie Bonaparte. Mm-hmm. And she was the one that was looking at these different women. I think it was this kind of a study of 200 different women and noticed.
She was a physician?
No, she was a psychoanalyst.
Why was the psychoanalyst looking at a bunch of
because she struggled to have orgasm herself, and then being a student of Freud, I believe what happened is that she was like, oh my goodness, okay, well, I'm struggling to have penetrative sex that leads me into orgasm without stimulating my clitoris. If I stimulate my clitoris, it's because I must have like a nubile developed sexual body. And she obviously found that disturbing, and so she was looking at like, well, what is it? Maybe there's actually something to do with the anatomy, and I'm wondering if maybe potentially she did this so as to kind of get out of feeling guilty around, well, it's because I'm immature. It's like, no, actually it's just the way that my body's built.
It's a really important point in that unfortunately we tend to orient to kind of the leading idea of the day. What I mean by that is women's sexuality and pleasure and how things work for women really is hugely influenced by the debate of the day, the media, whatever gets picked up, kind of the fad.
Yep.
So what happened to her specifically? So 100 years ago, she can't have an orgasm through penetration alone. So she starts to look at like how was it a physician that just did examinations and she came across the research, or she was just like, can I have 200 volunteers and can we have a look? Like,
I'm not actually sure. I can take a look and find some of the details of it really quickly.
I think it would be good to just see.
I know it was like around like 200 women that they had observed, and interestingly enough, she was so convinced of it that she kind of put her money where her mouth is. I don't know if that's the best analogy to use for this, but she actually went through doing a surgery to reduce that distance, like physically altering her body to be able to have these type of orgasms, and did it twice, and it failed both times.
I'm sure it would have failed both times.
So
not sound like a good surgery.
So here we go. Despite what she described as sexual dysfunction, this is from Wikipedia, Marie Bonaparte conducted affairs with Sigmund Freud's disciple Rudolf Lowenstein, as well as Ariste Briand, her husband's aide-de-camp Lambesis, a prominent French physician, and possibly others. She was troubled by her difficulty in achieving sexual fulfillment, meaning orgasm, during penetrative sex. Marie engaged in research. So in 1924, she published her results under a pseudonym, so she didn't use her real name.
That's exactly 100 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. A.E. Well, it's time to set the record straight.
Yeah, let's do that.
A.E. Narjani is the name that she published under. And she presented her theory of frigidity, meaning struggle to have an orgasm, in the medical journal Brussels Medical, having measured the distance between the vagina and the clitoris glands in 200 different women.
Okay.
So.
And what did they find? Lots of variety?
Well, yes, that there was variety, and this is what it is. Women with a distance of more than 2.5 centimeters, so that would be about this much distance between and this is again where more recently there was another study that was done, because this study was done like 100 years ago. It was also done again later, and the places what they used to measure the distance, be it from the base of the glands or from the tip of the glands, was changed. But in this recent kind of reevaluation of these two studies, it was taking a look at this, and I think this was more in like 2000s. I can actually look that one up as well. But the thing that's quite interesting here is that you have people that are noticing certain kind of external looks and trying to, and using then this sort of ideology as a motivation to explain why something's happening, or it also kind of cause change around it. So it's not, again, based off of strictly what is this person feeling, but instead a label that this type of pleasure is nubile, therefore you must be able to go and to do this other one.
This happens so much.
To become more mature.
I mean, in research, when I was writing my dissertation, a piece of research came out. Actually, it was leaked to the media because it was never peer reviewed. It should have never been published because it wouldn't have been accepted. but it was leaked to the media, and then it became this overnight sensation. And I actually remember teaching a class, and the woman in the class came. She had printed out this information, and she said, "See, this is why I don't have a vaginal orgasm." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And it was a study done by an Italian researcher who essentially had studied only male sexuality and then decided to study very briefly female anatomy, but used like less than a handful of people, I can't remember, very few people, and then determined that not everybody has a quote unquote G-spot. So we did a G-spot episode. We don't need to go into it now, but the point is around looking at how the media can say, look, this is what's going on. Don't worry, because this is what's going on. It's why you're not able to do this. And so the women in the class that I was teaching are like, well, you see, I don't have the right anatomy, so I can never have that. And I was like, this is complete BS. I was so upset. I took the piece of paper, I ripped it up. I said, no, it would be like saying not all males are born with a prostate gland. That's the equivalent of what this research is saying, and I don't accept it. There are structures, perhaps certain types of situations, or the inability to breathe a certain way, or certain tensions, or even lack of erectile function within the female body is preventing that area to engorge or be activated. But I absolutely refuse to believe that some women are born without the structure in place, because that's not possible. That's not how nature works.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you saw the label of frigidity that Marie Bonaparte used. And this is, again, a very strong label on, women aren't having an orgasm. Something must be wrong. It can't be the men that are doing something off. Something's wrong with the woman. She's just frigid. Therefore, you put that label down. Word.
I really do.
Then, which is like a medical term at that point.
Yeah.
Now,
it still is, I believe.
Now you have the opposite end of the spectrum, though, which is, okay, well, we don't want to shame women or make them feel that, they're less than other women. So as opposed to giving an education on how to kind of discover, awaken, enliven certain areas of the body, instead what we end up doing is, oh no, it's just right. Yeah, okay, we're all different. Not all women have the possibility of doing that. We don't want you to feel bad. And so therefore they then just give this information out that everyone's just different. You have a certain anatomy that is this way. Therefore, you don't have to feel bad that you can't have that.
It's like saying, it's literally like saying, if you are not a certain height, you can't walk. That's what it's essentially saying.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely ridiculous. We know no matter what height a human being is, unless they've got some kind of problem with the act of walking, meaning like paralysis of the legs or the whole body, or an injury of some sort. But every human being from birth is designed to walk, no matter what height person is going to end up being. And some people, then you could say, well, maybe you're too large to walk, right? Because that's another. No, that's not true at all. Like, doesn't matter the width you are or the height you are. You should mechanically be able to move your body. Human beings evolved to walk. And so this argument doesn't work for me. I don't like this argument that, since you don't have this, then you can't do this. No, for me, that just shows that the researchers and the educators are malinformed and are actually not practicing deep sexual pleasures and exploration themselves. They're probably reliant on what they learned in books or on porn or just even through their sexology course, because it seems to me that everyone who goes through a sexology course, the main piece of advice is the latest, greatest sex toy rather than actually understanding the deeper mechanics of the body, which I'm always very grateful for your work around suction sex and those mechanics. Could you maybe, because I mentioned porn, I mentioned suction sex, can you tell us the difference between like what porn anatomy would be and
I love
look, they're humping the tree. You see, they're going like this. The birds are out there like this.
What are the name of these birds again?
I don't remember. But they're very funny birds. So the difference between porn anatomy and suction sex anatomy, if you could just take us there before we have a few more minutes before we jump into the explicit content.
Well, and this I think gets down to the basis of what we're saying here.
Mm-hmm.
If we're looking at it from just a kind of pure researcher's lens of, oh, well, if we take a look at this distance here and that distance here, then this has that and that has that. So therefore, there's a correlation, and because there's a correlation, we're almost going to look at it now that it's like, well, if you have this here as the cause, then that must be the effect of it. Well, the problem is, and I think this is something that's quite important, is that understanding anatomy as just these dissected or bisected parts of the body and not seeing how they work together as a unit is a very big difference between what I'm calling friction sex, this kind of past understanding of how we look at sex, where you're looking for different points and spots and places to touch and different little structures to stimulate. Whereas with suction sex, you start to look at everything holistically and seeing that, oh, wait, this isn't just the clitoris, this isn't just the urethra, this isn't just the vagina, but there's actually like a CUV complex, that all of these anatomical structures,
which we also did
on as well. And the CUV complex is the clitoral-urethral vaginal complex. But in addition to that, I would also add in the cervix, which is part of the womb. I would bring in the heart, I would bring in the lungs, I would bring in the hips and the whole body, because it's about bringing blood flow to this entire anatomical system of pleasure, which then brings me to my second difference here in understanding anatomy and the issue around CUMD or CUMD as being the strict predictor of, you know, a person being able to label themselves as anorgasmic or not, or frigid or not, is that if we think of anatomy as just like a map on a 2D dimensional plane, there's no movement there. Everything's just static. Flat. Now, well, it's also flat, but it's also static, meaning it doesn't move.
That's also when you dissect a cadaver, it's also not moving.
Exactly.
There's no blood
it's
flow.
Dead.
There's nothing going on.
Nothing's engorged.
You can't actually really understand function through a dead body.
Yes. And so understanding that there, just with the land, there's changes to the seasons, and with time, how the grass grows, the color of it, you know, the height of the trees, like all kinds of things are constantly changing. It's quite dynamic, and a map can help you navigate it somewhat. But if all you have as an understanding of the land is a map and not the land itself, then you really are missing out a lot. So the way that with suction sex, understanding that the quote-unquote vaginal vulva map of the entire system of pleasure is actually moving and is dynamic, moving in the sense that as you breathe, it's literally changing positions.
This is the thing I think that's the most exciting. I think we should go into this more into the explicit part of the podcast. But the thing that really excited me about your work, and also when we were doing the medical protocol and we were trying to anatomically demonstrate what was going on, it was clear that no one ever anywhere has shown how the anatomy, the genital anatomy, the interior genital anatomy of the female body actually has a huge amount of movement. And that's something I think is really missing and needs to be explored more. So I don't know if you have another final thought for this
one last piece here that I think is so absolutely important is that, and this is why I think this is important here, is that we have all of these ideas of what our bodies are supposed to look like from the outside, whether it's to measure can we have this orgasm, or if it's just purely aesthetics. And a lot of people, we'll get into more of this in the second part, are doing surgeries, changing themselves to either try and look correct or to try and create more sensation. But a lot of times they overrun their natural systems of arousal that would actually take them where they wanted to go and beyond what they thought was actually possible. And that, I think, is the last piece that we'll mention for this in terms of anatomy with friction sex and anatomy with suction sex, is the experience of one's body. Whereas you're trying to kind of like force or cause things to happen for like this very fleeting orgasm. I think Nicole Proust defines it as 8 to 12 contractions that happen slightly less than a second apart, and over time get like the time between each contraction becomes more latent, meaning that there's more space between it until it subsides. And that's kind of like the pinnacle feeling that you can maybe get if you are looking at like how to have an orgasm via friction sex and how to experience one's anatomy. That's like the pinnacle of it. Whereas, and the reality that a lot of people have is that it's either painful or that they have numbness, and these are situations that you're just kind of dealt with life, either situationally or chronically from the day you were born, and there's nothing that can be done to change that. Whereas with suction sex, we know that you can actually resensitize, you can learn different types of mechanics, and that will create different belief structures, different ways of defining the kind of places and varieties and kind of orgasms that you can have. And it just really opens you up to exploration and sensation as opposed to like definition and labeling.
Yes.
So again, what we're really trying to bring here is how can we start to be guided by our experience and the sensation of our anatomy to teach us truth, as opposed to only relying on some external source to tell us how it is. It doesn't mean we don't listen to the external source, but it's giving us a suggestion of the direction we want to go, and then we test it out in our bodies.
Yes. I think it's time to switch.
All right.
To join us for the complete and explicit version of this podcast, just simply upgrade your membership and you'll get instant access.